Today I want to talk about something that is rather pathetic, actually, and kind of sad if you spend much time thinking about it. And that is the very low quality of relationships, just in general. And I'm talking about even some of the closest relationships that people have. You know, I remember being in some kind of, I don't know, it was like maybe a personality evaluation type of training or something like that. Might have been a Myers-Briggs or whatever, or something kind of like that. I think it was a training for work, or maybe it was associated with some kind of counseling or interpersonal relationships dynamics class or something like that. And I remember there was this discussion about emotional bank accounts and how when people interact with each other, they have this, somebody can treat somebody else poorly, but every time they do, it's like a debit against that person's bank account for that person. In other words, if there's John and Sally, and then John has John has an account in Sally's emotional bank, and Sally has an account in John's emotional bank. So whenever Sally and John interact with each other, if Sally does something good for John, then that adds credits into the bank account of Sally for John. And whenever John does something good for Sally, then that'll raise her emotional bank, his emotional bank account by a certain amount for Sally. And so this idea of emotional bank accounts is that you do things that make people feel good, and then you have a high bank account value with them, and you do things that don't make them feel good, and then you have a low bank account value with them. The idea being that you always want to have a positive value, otherwise you run the risk of losing the relationship. Now, this basically makes relationships seem like they're very transactional. And in fact, I would say that for the most part they are. That people cannot love other people unless the emotional bank account is at a certain level between them. What that means is that nobody really understands what unconditional love is all about. That there is actually an economy of emotion, an economy of a relationship economy, I guess, which actually sickens me because I don't like the idea of everything coming down to an account, where you almost need an accountant that's putting debits and credits in some kind of tally, in some kind of ledger, to determine whether this is a healthy relationship or an unhealthy relationship based on whether somebody's not putting in enough effort or if they're putting in too much effort. So it totally takes away from the truth of what love really is, what real love is. Because when real love is expressed, it is unconditional. And I'm not talking about just love between husband and wife or love between a mother and her child. I'm talking because even those, I think, are subject to this whole dynamic of a relationship economy that's subject to transactions of emotion. Because people get their feelings hurt when somebody doesn't treat them right. They take shit personally instead of realizing that what another person does or says, even if it's directed at you, it does not determine who you are. That the value that you have is independent of what anybody else thinks of you, says to you, how they express themselves to you, whether they give you love or don't give you love. That makes no difference as far as who you are and the love that you have and the love that you can express and that you can give. Now, I say this not as somebody who has become to the point where I don't get my feelings hurt and that I am impervious to what anybody else says to me or does to me. That's not my point. I'm not saying that I'm better than anybody else. But what I'm saying is that I've come to realize that we're all in this, should say most of us, almost all of us, are in this trap of belief that in order for us to love somebody, in order for us to have a relationship that can continue and flourish between two people, that there has to be this certain level of transaction that occurs in order for love to exist. I don't believe that's true. I think love exists regardless. But the problem is that people take it away. They don't understand love. They don't, if they don't feel it, if they don't know it, then they don't express it. And then it's that human frailty, the unworthiness that each of us feels that prevents us from actually showing the love that we actually have deep down in our core for each other. Because deep down, all of us are actually connected. At our core of who we are as infinite beings, we are connected. But we're so disconnected from that. We, in our egoic way of looking at life, are so disconnected from the underlying connectedness that we all share because we allow our fears and our feelings of inadequacy to separate us from each other and to separate us even from ourselves, from our true selves. Because it's our true selves that really, in their substance, is love. We, at our core, are love. And we, therefore, when we're truly experiencing love, when we truly feel love, it isn't limited to just the people that have an emotional bank account with us that's at a certain level. That love is toward every other being. In its purest form, that love is toward everyone, regardless of what their, quote, emotional bank account looks like with us. Because unconditional love is unconditional and it knows no difference between people. Therein is the reason why Jesus could be nailed to a cross and ask for the forgiveness for the people who did it, saying they didn't know what they were doing. That is why, even though he knew Judas Iscariot was going to betray him and was actually stealing from the money as the treasure of all the donations that came into the 12 disciples, even though he knew this about Judas, he knew that the man was not righteous, he still loved him and allowed him to be among the 12. So, being able to love like that unconditionally, you can know things that are going on and still accept them, because it isn't about whether or not somebody else is trying to take advantage of you or slighting you or hurting you or humiliating you. It doesn't matter, because there's this love inside you that continues to flow out to others around you, regardless of how they treat you. And that ability to not be upset by what anybody else does, that's that condition of imperturbability that I've referred to before. And in becoming imperturbable, the love just flows and is unconditional and not conditioned on the reaction of anybody else, the response to your flowing love from anybody else. Even if they take up arms against you, spit in your face, humiliate you, treat you like shit, that love can still flow from you to them. And you won't necessarily feel the urge to defend yourself against them, because you know that ultimately your life on this planet is very short-lived, and it's just a body that dies, but the real you continues on. Anyway, I'm getting kind of deep here, but my main point, of course, I think I've already made it, is that in our depravity, we see relationships as transactional. All of them. And my personal goal is to get away from that, so that all of my relationships have love, have unconditional love, so that the feeling of love that I have for others puts me in a position of never fearing any interaction with anybody, regardless of what I think they might do to me. And that is being imperturbable. Anyway, that's all I have for today. Ciao.